It's the 19th of September today, and it's absolutely perfect conditions, which I couldn't have said 2 nights ago when I gave up because it became very windy after about 3/4 of an hour and went home. And my only other attempt to trap during September was earlier in the month, and I again admitted defeat and returned home through illness. I feel fine now, and the weather is fine too. Hopefully we'll get a decent night. This is being described by those down south as potentially the best night of the year for moth migration. There's a warm flow from the southwest which goes as far as the Canaries, and good things are expected tonight. Whether those good things reach the field here at the side of Lound remains to be seen, but I'll be happy with one or maybe a couple or so species of migrants, plus a nice selection of locals. However, we're at the time of year now where the species list is very much restricted, but this is the perfect night for it. Well, we're off and running at 19:45. Well, not a bad little start. Sky is only just about getting dark now, and a couple of interesting bits. I've had silver wire. Normally I wouldn't say or describe silver wire as being particularly interesting, but the interesting fact with this silver wire turning up is that it's the first one I've pretty much seen since the end of July. I was recording them throughout July, well, for a lot of June and daily throughout July, and then all of a sudden they stopped. I'd got them coming down to the moth lure, and each morning I would check that lure for moths and Duix plusias and silver wires, and then all of a sudden they stopped coming, and I stopped seeing them out and about, and I stopped recording them at light, and one's just turned up this evening. It's quite funny how what is normally the commonest migrant has done a complete disappearing act, at least in my part of Nottinghamshire. So we have one of those in this evening, and it's just sort of run-of-the-mill fare, 4 square spot rustic. 3 brindled greens are nice, and they're a very variable moth. Some can be really quite green, others less so, but it's a nice moth to get, and it's quite typical fare, certainly here on an autumn evening. And new for the year is a barred sallow, which once it settles down we might get a chance to have a look at. Failing that, here's a nice photograph of what is an absolutely beautiful moth. It's one of those sort of yellow and pink moths that moth trappers go on about during the autumn, and there are a nice selection of yellow and pink moths, and hopefully we may get 1 or 2 more species, but promising signs so far of an interesting night to come. There's a nice steady stream of moths coming into the light. No great numbers, but to be honest, it makes quite a change. It's all very well having hundreds and hundreds of moths around the light, and we all like that, I must admit, and I love to show you that amount of moths around the light. But after the height of the summer's moth activity, it's nice just to have a night like this where it's steady. You can easily monitor the moths coming in and the moths that have been in and around the light for a while. There's going to be no great species list, but I think we can probably top 30 this evening. It's started off quite promising, and there's some decent moths that we've had in too. Plutella xylostella is the second species of migratory moths that's come in. Aethes beatricella, there's a couple of those in, and I'm pretty sure that I've had this species at Eakring before. Have recorded it at a number of sites, and so that's a nice one because it's a beautiful little moth, actually, to be honest. Acleris sparsana is rather dingy in comparison to Aethes beatricella. It's just quite plain and silvery and often looks worn and is very poorly marked, but it's a nice species to have here, and it's a species that flies for the next few months. And Scrobipalpa acellotella species, which has suddenly come into Nottinghamshire and many other Midland counties over the last few years, and it's certainly breeding here and is, well, it looks set to be here permanently. Can occur in good numbers. Some sites this year in the Trent Valley have recorded really good numbers of acellotella. Of the macros, brimstone is in, the first of the year's lunar underwings, Cetaceous Hebrew character. There's a couple of broad-bordered yellow underwings and a couple of large yellow underwings that have arrived at the light. 2 ruby tiger are in, and 2 straw dots too. So a nice selection of moths, nothing particularly rare or interesting as yet, but a nice selection all the same. Well, I don't know whether my realisation that there was something interesting on the sheet was caught at the end of that last piece to camera. Moth in a pot time, and it's a species that I've been after. 1 or 2 people have been recording these because it's having a good year, and it's a migrant too, and it's scarce bordered straw. I spotted it on the sheet. It's very conspicuous to identify, actually, with the dark border to the trailing edge of the hind wings. It looks a well marked moth, and it's a species that I've not seen since the great migrant year of 2006, when this was one of the locations Dillis and I caught this particular species. So I'm absolutely chuffed with this. This is yet another migrant to the list of 2025 species that I've caught or trapped or lured. Just the moth that I wanted to see. It's nothing spectacularly beautiful. Quite often it's not even well marked, and it's just like a dull straw colour with just slightly darker brown markings. At one time before 2006, this was a real rarity, pretty much anywhere away from the south coast and southeastern coast, and it had a marvellous year in 2006. There's been a couple of years that it's occurred in since then, but this is my first in 19 years. That's worrying to think that 2006 and all those brilliant nights trapping are all that long ago, and yet they only seem like yesterday. Nice to get one of these. There's a small nick out of its wingtip on its right forewing, but I'm very pleased to finally see scarce bordered straw again. Well, here's that scarce bordered straw, which has settled down quite nicely. This one actually is fairly well marked for the scarce bordered straws that Dillis and myself trapped in 2006. But I'm overjoyed at just catching one of these and seeing one of these moths again. Such a massive rarity 20 years ago. It's just a species that I hoped would turn up this evening. It may not look much, but in this instance, it's its rarity as a migrant species that really sort of counts here and makes it somewhat special. Oh, we have another silver wine. Nicely marked, this one. You can see how this moth derives its name by that upside down Y marking. There's very little variation really in that Y marking, but in terms of sort of ground colour and other markings on the wings, they can vary considerably. They can also vary in size. There's a very small variety which often occurs at times of high migration. I've quite missed seeing silver wire. They were always a staple sort of thing that I used to like to watch in the garden. I used to count these coming to Valerian on a night time or on an evening time when they would all come in, and the garden could be full of these. And after a really promising year, it's just so surprising how they just totally disappeared. They did exactly the same as red admirals and painted ladies did. Maybe they continued to move north and had another generation there, and are in fact starting to come back down south. Although the two that I had this evening could well be the forerunners to migrants moving north and arriving in the UK tonight. Still nice to see. Well, looking at the sheet, you wouldn't think that I've had anything at all to get excited about, but it's much better on paper than what it is on the sheet. Most of the activity is coming from lots of crane flies. It's nice to see good numbers of crane flies, and to be honest, I didn't think there would be, what with it being so dry this year. I thought crane flies might have suffered, but I have seen them in much larger numbers than here. But there are veritable orgies going on the other side of the light, so I'd best keep the camera this side. I would hate anybody to get too excited. But a nice evening's trapping. Very nice indeed. Had some nice species, and I'm sure there are more on the way. It would be nice to think so. Well, something's happening. I'm not entirely sure what yet, but at the base of the hedge there was a moth flying around, and I could make out that it too had a dark border to the hind wings, and it's turned out to be a bordered straw, and a very dark and well marked bordered straw. It's very fresh looking, and so yet another migrant species. What a year this is turning out to be. And then within seconds this chap turned up, which at one time would definitely have been classed as a migrant, and it's a Duix plusia, and it's absolutely immaculate. Second one for the ecrin area, and absolutely beautiful. And both these moths came in within a minute or so. And then a large silver Y has also dropped in, much better condition than the one that I've just filmed, and we've probably seen just before this piece to camera. What an interesting night this is. I've said interesting quite a few times, but this has the makings of a really, really good moth trapping evening. And certainly if migrants like these keep turning up, it's going to be a long evening. And yet there's hardly a moth on the sheet. There's a few around the light, but not many actually on the sheet, and not many coming in. but there's some quality to what is coming in. Well, here's a very different silver wire to the one that I showed you a while ago. It's very large for one thing, and very dark. It's immaculate. It's another one which is, well, it's interesting that the bordered straw, the Duke's Plusia, and this are all immaculate, and this is getting ready to up and off. Beautifully marked. Well, 26 species so far. I'm very pleased with that. 30 definitely on the cards, as you would expect. There's a few species that I would have expected to have turned up that haven't as yet. And I do have one micro, one nice Tortrix to go back to be identified via photographs in the morning. So 27 species certainly. And a nice selection too. I never thought I'd see the day where Duke's Plusia, bordered straw, scarce bordered straw were all on the same page of the notebook. How things have changed. It's been quite quiet this last sort of half an hour since the bordered straw and Duke's Plusia came in. I have just had another Duke's Plusia, but far more worn than the immaculate one that I first got. Generally, it's very quiet, but for such a quiet night, you wouldn't believe the moths that I've had. There's another gold spot in. That makes 2 gold spots now that I can see. But the sheet is incredibly quiet, and yet it's a fabulous night. You have to remember that this is Nottinghamshire, not some sort of east coast or south coast hotspot. But to get the likes of Duke's Plusia and bordered straw and scarce bordered straw and silver wire, it's just brilliant. Some people forget, I think, that it's very different for inland counties in terms of catching migrants. It's something to catch certain species of migrants, anything other than sort of diamondback and silver wire. But that's changing. It's becoming regular now to trap species like Duke's Plusia several times a year. It's unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. I'm sure that over the coming years, probably another couple of species are going to become almost resident, if they aren't already. Delicate is one. That's still a moth I've never seen. I would love to see Delicate and one of those to come in. But without a doubt, there are species waiting in the wings to arrive in Nottinghamshire. It all makes for exciting times. Well, 10:30, and I just saw a smallish moth land in the grass just at the side of the light. And it's a Vestal, and it's an absolute stonkingly marked Vestal. The line across it, which can sometimes be pinkish or even brownish, this is a really brilliant red. It's a fabulous specimen. And of course, it's another migrant moth. Something is clearly afoot this evening. I'd forgotten about the chance of Vestal dropping in, but there's not been so many of late. On the big migrant night that Dillis and I had in 2006, it was October. All the activity started just after midnight. These are all sort of well spaced, the moths that have come in. So it's going to be interesting to see what, if anything, develops. But to get the likes of Vestal, do exclusive bordered straw and scarce bordered straw on one night in Nottinghamshire, I think is really something. Their games are afoot, Watson. It's gone 11:30, and it's been very quiet for pretty much the last hour, to be honest. Since that Vestal came in, there's been virtually nothing coming, just odd moths. And it's not until this last 2 minutes or so that a few more moths have started to come in again. But it's a very strange night. It's one of those strange nights where not a lot seems to be flying, and yet we've got the species list that we have. And saying that, there's another moth thinking about coming in to the light. But over the last sort of half an hour or so, we've had black rustic, the first one of the autumn. That's an absolute beauty of a moth. Jet black pretty much, although some can be paler, but it is a very attractive species. Ribboned wave, which would certainly be a third generation moth, has just dropped in. 2 small blood veins, one much better condition than the other one. They both arrived at the same time. All the recent moths, pine carpet has come in. A couple of red-green carpets also knocking about around the light. We're up to about 3 brimstones now. And Carcina quercana, the first sort of scientific name that Dillis learnt all those years ago. And it's a lovely moth too, with quite long antenna, but very attractive. So all in all, we're now on 38 species. We're certain to get 40 species. What will 39 and 40 be? The mind boggles that it could be anything, but it has been very, very quiet in terms of moths flying in. But there isn't a breath of wind now. Temperature's still 15 centigrade. So we'll see what comes in. Well, as you can see from this view, just the side of the car looking towards the light, there's pretty much nothing flying. Moths occasionally come in, but you wouldn't think we'd have done as well as we have. Light brown apple moth is one of the latest species in. Temperature now, as we reach midnight, is 13 centigrade, so it's dropped a couple of degrees in this last hour. But on the migrant front, there's been a second scarce bordered straw drop in a while ago. I've made times of when the migrants have arrived, or the rarer migrants have arrived, just to see whether there's been any kind of pattern. It's been quite even from what I can remember. We'll see what else comes in this next hour. I have to stop longer. So we're 3¼ hours in. You can see a few moths probably buzzing on the sheet, but very, very few moths are actually flying, or seem to be flying. Well, it's been very quiet really this last hour, and certainly the last half an hour. I've only had 2 moths come in, burnished brass and a single snout. There's nothing flying though. It's ever so quiet. But the breeze has picked up. You may well be able to see the vegetation a bit behind, but it is quite a stiff breeze now, and I didn't expect that. I thought I was going to get a nice still night, but no, there's been a bit of a breeze for a lot of the night, to be honest, but it does seem to have got a little bit stronger this last hour or so. And the plan is at the moment to give it till 0:45, which is 1:45 in old money, and then maybe start and pack up. The thing is, if there is some big migration taking place, the moths could start and come in the next few hours. If they do, then I stop, but I must admit I can't complain about the species that I've got. I wanted a few migrants tonight, and I've certainly got them. Well, it's 1:15 and it's still very, very quiet in terms of moths actually coming into the light. But I've had 4 brilliant hours despite it being very quiet, with few moths seemingly coming in. But when the species list of over 40 species includes 2 Duix plusia, 2 scarce bordered straw, a single bordered straw and a Vestal, I can't complain that much really, can I? Not here in landlocked Nottinghamshire. So time to switch off the generator and get ready to head for home.